Good afternoon and welcome to a special workshop meeting of the Oak Harbor City Council. Today is Wednesday, September 27th. It is 2 p.m. We don't normally sit at the dais for a workshop meeting, but we didn't know what to anticipate today in the way of crowd and public for input. So we are at the dais, but this is a special workshop meeting. We do have several items on our agenda. We are scheduled to be have those items completed at 4:30 by 4:30 this afternoon, and I think with that, we won't do introductions since we've got our nameplates here, and you know who we are for the most part up here. We do have some staff. I'll welcome you and not ask for the entire staff to introduce themselves at this meeting. And I'll just start with the 205 Administration Sleeper Road Property Discussion. And I believe that that'll be Mr. Powers, our Director of Government Services.
Yes, thanks, Mayor.
Yep.
And to reiterate, it is a workshop, even though you're up there at the dais, so I encourage you to be conversational, and we'll do our best to act in the same fashion. So this item is on your agenda for really a couple of reasons. One, to bring you up to speed on where we've been as a staff working on this. You know, it's been some time with a number of steps. And the other real reason that we have it on your agenda this afternoon is to start to get some feedback from you as to where you think you'd like for us to go next. Just a couple of quick slides to show you the property itself. To remind you where it is in relation to city limits. It's north of town, of course, that's Sleeper Road and the intersection with SR 20, and there it is in a little bit larger scale. So as you saw in your rather short agenda, Bill, we've undertaken a few things over the last year and a half or so, I guess it probably is. First was the harvesting of the timber, of course, with council authorization to do that. And then we used those proceeds to help us with some special studies. One was an appraisal of the property, and it was a different kind of an appraiser and appraisal because of the subsurface mining potential for that particular piece of property. And then the other special study was the geotechnical report, which really gave the council and staff some idea of what kind of volume of material we were dealing with should somebody want to acquire the property for sand and gravel operation. The appraisal raised a couple of questions from a perspective of the county zoning. How is the property actually zoned, and what's the best zoning in terms of the highest and best use? Seemed to be some conflicting information in there, but when you really start to parse that out, you see that while the zoning for both parcels is in fact rural, we've confirmed that with the county. The county assessor has one of the parcels assessed as industrial. So I think that was part of what the confusion was. But because we really wanted to get a handle on that, we did a little extra work, and there was a copy of a memo that Dennis Lefevre, senior planner, put together for you, or for us rather. Put that in your packet, started on page 99. It gave us some background information about the parcel itself. It really tried to answer the question of what's the highest and best use, similar to what we saw in the appraisal. It walked through the thought process on land use codes, zoning, and comp plan. It really boils down to this question. Should the city consider rezoning that property prior to us potentially selling it, or should we leave it as is? I think after staff has looked at this, we've come to the conclusion that we think it's best just for us, should the council wish to sell it, to market it as is, and not for the city to try to go through the process of establishing any additional land use rights or entitlements. That's really the long and the short of that particular memo, which I think ends on page 102 of your packet. So Kathy is with me this afternoon. We'd be happy to help you with what questions you might have, but really we're just looking for a sense of direction. Is the council still desirous of selling the property? If so, do you want to sell it as is, or do you want us to try to go through that rezoning and or comp plan process?
Okay, does the council have any input or questions? Councilor Heisen.
What would the benefit be of rezoning it?
It's not actually clear to us. The reason that we got on the track of looking at the rezoning was there was a comment from the appraiser made to one of the public works staff that was working on this project that he thought that rezoning the property to industrial might make some sense. As Dennis looked at the county code, the rezoning to industrial has challenges under its current comprehensive plan designation. In other words, we don't actually think that you could do that. We'd have to go through the comp plan process. And we started to ask ourselves, is this worth the city's time and investment to go through that, or would we be better served to, again, assuming that you want to sell it, just sell it as is, and let the new owner either pursue those conditional use permits for the sand and gravel, or let them pursue some other zoning classification. And if I could, I'll add on to that. The other reason we've come to that conclusion is the appraiser seemed to get some preliminary indication from county staff that they thought that the residential use, which comes with the existing rural zoning, was the better use right now. And so while, of course, that's an informal opinion, we did take note of that.
That makes sense.
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Powers, this property owned by the city, it's in close proximity of NAS with the island. Now, the primary uses stated in the agenda bill or in this agenda, the land designated as R zone, although it is owned by the city, is not even in the urban growth area or within the city limits. The island counties still have the prerogative of having improvements because of the zone area. And the improvements says that the permitted uses, a couple of those are bed and breakfast room or daycare nursery. And the height of the improvement will not exceed 35 feet with exemption of communication, antenna, chimneys, water tanks. What I'm concerned about, if the city sell this property, the city will not have control of the property, then it will become, I'm concerned about encroachment to NAS with me, like what has happened to areas around the outlying field. Is it in the best interest of the city to sell this property or keep it like an open space?
As usual, Mr. Pagal, it's a great question. And I think there's probably a couple parts to that answer. The first part maybe is that while the things that you're listing are attributes of the rural zone are in fact those attributes, it doesn't mean that those are things which can occur in every piece of property in the county that has rural zone. While I'm by no means an expert in the county's code, my recollection is that they also, of course, have noise zone restrictions as well as APZ restrictions, and given the proximity to the air station, some of the things that you were listing off of your generic list of things that can happen in rural, I would doubt could actually occur at this particular location. So that's sort of the first part of that answer. Probably the second part of the answer is that even if the rural uses and the residential use is allowed under the county, we're talking about one house per 5 acres. And so, you know, that's not a tremendously large density of housing in that general area. The third part of your question really is, that's really the council's policy choice. I know that you've asked the question about selling the land. Is this something that we can do? Can we dispose of unused city properties and use those proceeds for something else, like funding improvements in Windjammer Park? We've heard that connection come up, and that's certainly a possibility for you. Only the council can really weigh whether you think that's whether or not holding on to the land to potentially prevent something from happening through the county permitting process is of as much value to you as having the proceeds from the sale. Staff really can't answer that question.
Yes, as a follow-up, the reason for my concern is encroachment. In the past, that's one of the bases for base closures in the East Coast, encroachment to Naval Air Station like in Dam Neck or surrounding areas.
Yeah,
That's all.
we're certainly keenly aware of that, and I think we still believe that a potential buyer for the property is most likely still interested in the sand and gravel operation, and so hard to predict whether somebody would actually follow that up with residential use or whether they would pursue something else after they've gone through the sand and gravel, after they've gone through the reclamation plan process that the state requires them to do. So that's just going to be really impossible for us to predict, but the value would appear to be in what's below the surface rather than what's on the surface.
Thank you, Mr. Powers. That's all.
Okay. Yes, Councilor Campbell.
Is there a lot of city employee hours spent if we just keep the property and sell it? Keep it as it is and sell it?
No. It may be working with a realtor on the marketing of it and then
Yeah.
agenda bills coming before council.
Some minor things?
Yes.
Okay.
Purchase and sale agreement,
Okay,
probably some of Nikki's time,
Yeah,
to
my-
help counsel with the sale, that kind of thing. But I don't think it would be staff intensive, no, Jim.
Good, thank you. My recommendation is going to sell it as it is and keep us out of it as much as possible.
I think that's where staff is. I mean, I think
Yeah.
we really think that's probably the better course of action for us.
Makes sense to me. Thank you.
Yes, Councilor Muntz.
Thank you, Mayor.
Mr. Powers, when we harvested the wood, there is a deadline when you have to replant. How many years is that, 5? 10? We had a lot of emails over
Yes,
that.
the replanting has already been done. It was
Okay.
done immediately. Over 3,000 seedlings were planted.
All right, thank you. And could we find out exactly what noise zone this property is in exactly? I'm sure that there's
Sure.
a map and. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
It's just
Councilor
out.
Servadius.
So I probably missed part of this when you were answering Ms. Heisen's question, but the amount of time to rezone it wouldn't necessarily make it any more marketable.
We don't think so, no. There doesn't appear to be an awful lot of zoning choices available to us. And so if, the appraiser's suggestion was that we look for industrial zoning. If I understand the research that Dennis has done for us, we can't rezone it to industrial under its current comprehensive plan designation in the county, which would mean we'd have to go through the comprehensive plan amendment process. And in that case, we would be just like any other applicant. We'd look to get onto their process. We wouldn't be doing that in 2018. We'd be looking to do it in 2019 and run our way through that particular process.
And so are the sand and gravel, is that of any value to us as a city internally to keep it for that reason?
I bet my friend Kathy's going to say no, that we're not positioned to run a sand and gravel ourselves, to mine it, to
Yes, that's correct.
you
We
know,
are not.
to make it usable for us. We're not in a position to do that.
Okay, that's all I have. I'm just thinking.
Okay, anyone else? Okay. Yes, Councilor Eisen.
Comment. One of our long-term plan concerns of mine is not having a plan to replace and/or remodel this building. And I'm afraid something dreadful is going to happen structurally, and then we'll be forced to address the fact that this building is inadequate. So I'm not sure if there are any provisions on what you can use proceeds from sold property are, if that just goes in the general fund, if that goes somewhere specific. But if we can, I mean, as a city, if we can unload surplus property that is, outside of the area and really of no functional use to us, I would love to see us do that and then maybe put those proceeds into a new city hall savings account or something, because as I understand it as of now, there's no plan to put any money towards that, so.
Okay.
So my office is downstairs, and if you have structural concerns, I'd really want to hear about those.
Yeah.
I mean, the mayor gets to sit upstairs, and I'm just pointing that out.
He may end up in your office.
Yeah. As far as I know, when we sell land, you know, where do the proceeds get to go? We typically look first to see what city funds were used to purchase the property in the first place.
That makes sense.
So if it was purchased with water funds, then the proceeds are going to go back into the water fund. This one probably.
It was general fund.
This was general fund, yeah. So that means that gives the council the maximum amount of flexibility in terms of how you might want to use those proceeds.
Okay.
Councillor,
Yeah.
oh, I'm sorry.
No, that makes sense.
Councillor Kim?
Ms. Eisen, that was an excellent question. Thank you.
So does the council have a general sense of what you'd like to see happen next?
Councillor Wassinger?
Oh, yes. I just had a quick question. Along those same lines, about the land itself, and I'm like 90% sure I know the answer to this, but just want to put it out there again before we do, make a recommendation to go forward. The land itself is no value to us as a piece of land for, as Mr. Campbell said, I believe, open space or a park or soccer fields or anything that as our city is growing that we're going to get squeezed out of in the far term future. It's nothing that's value to us as a park space.
Not that we can think of at this time. I think we need to look at the noise zone and see what's allowed in that noise zone, if recreational facilities would be allowed. But at this time, we can't think of any.
I think I'd feel comfortable maybe making sure. I mean, it doesn't seem like an ideal spot, just thinking in general about land and where parks would be. But if we're talking about a long-term plan and we're talking about Windjammer and losing ball fields, and I know I'm a broken record and I've said this 100 times, and the school district expanding and maybe losing soccer fields, that's, what do we have? Is it 40 acres here? That's quite a bit that I would want to make sure was not usable in our long-term plan, and if there's space somewhere else that would be. And maybe again, I know City Hall is a great idea, but parks are also important to our families and, another use for that funding too. So.
No, it's good to be thinking about that. You don't want to pursue a short-term goal and foreclose a longer-term opportunity. I mean, I think we always try to look down the road a ways on those things. I would say that we may think about this property differently if it was flat, but since it's nowhere close to being flat, very difficult to utilize for an active recreation facility without a substantial amount of cost. And so I think we're still pretty comfortable in saying out loud that we believe the best is to probably dispose of the property. But we'll certainly look at this noise zone question. We'll make sure we can answer that confidently for the council, and then come back and get a little bit more of a general direction from you, and then take the appropriate next steps, if that works for you folks.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I just pulled the noise zone map and it's in the most sensitive, closest area, which.
Yeah, it's awful close to that blue mass up there. That's the Altfield Station. So it should probably be fairly noisy. And then in general, most outdoor activities are not encouraged when you are in that noise zone.
Councillor Servadius?
I would love to sell it to Island County for a discount of 10% off its assessed value.
You know what? We'll let you approach the county commissioners on that one and tell us how it works out. All right.
Okay, seeing no other questions, I think it would be wise for the council to think about potential opportunities for this money if we do sell the property, and I think we have a retreat plan before too long. Could be that we could discuss in more detail options and opportunities. You've heard City Hall and ball fields, and I think I previously heard Windjammer. We're going to look for money in Windjammer. So we probably have a number of things that we could look at and analyze to try to make the best decision.
Makes good sense, and then based upon the outcome of those conversations, we can either come back to you in this kind of setting, or if you think we're ready, we can just go straight to a formal council agenda and get the high sign to move on a particular approach. Good, thank you.
Okay, that's item number A. Now we'll go to storm drain art projects. Is that yours, Public Works
Yes.
Director Kathy Rosen?
Yes,
Go ahead.
sir, that is mine, Mayor. Thank you, members of the council. The Storm Drain Division is considering an art program which we would implement around some of our storm drain facilities, such as catch basins and manholes. And we've included in your packet some examples of what other communities have done with similar type projects. We are in the early exploratory stages of how a program like this might be implemented here in Oak Harbor. And two areas that we've been looking at are Windjammer Park and Pioneer Way. And I do know that one of our staff members has talked with representatives from Main Street to get their thoughts on this idea, and the Main Street representatives seem positive about it. If you think this would be a program that you could support, staff would like to have the assistance from the Arts Commission in helping us to select artists and the actual art which would go around these storm drain facilities. And if we look at putting it in Windjammer, the program would start after the completion of the initial phase of the park improvements. And if we wish to have this type of art on Pioneer Way, we could probably begin in summer of 2018.
Okay. Council, Councilor Wassinger?
I think it's a great idea. I approve. I think anything to bring awareness to, the storm drains and where that ultimately goes and being responsible is great. And I think it too would be fun. I know people love seeing the artwork. I think the fire hydrant art was fun, and anything to make our city more enjoyable and, impact a good quality of life here is a good thing. So I agree.
Yes, Councilor Heisen.
I'm a huge fan of art and public art, but I love how it's not just art, but it incorporates a message, and it's something that is going to catch people's eye and that they will actually see and remember. So, yes, I love this idea with every fiber of my being. Awesome.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? I like it too. Thank you. Thank you, Kathy. Okay, we'll move on to engineering. Item number A is transportation concurrency. And it looks like staff has asked that this item be moved to the October workshop.
Yes.
Yeah, our consultant wasn't able to be here today with us, and
Okay.
really they're a big part of this conversation, so
Okay.
we'll just move this to October.
Okay. No questions? Okay, good. We'll go on to item number B then, at this time, windmill discussion. And it looks like that also Kathy Rosen, Public
Yes.
Works.
Thank you, Mayor. So late last spring, we had a windstorm that highlighted some structural deficiencies in the windmill down in Windjammer Park. There was some debris that fell off of the windmill, so we had our building department staff look at it, and then at the end of June, we hired a structural engineering firm, Ashley and Vance Engineers, to perform a structural inspection, and they've made some recommendations. They had some things that we needed to do immediately, which was remove some loose pieces and fence off a small area, as it was right before the 4th of July celebration. But we now need to, with the winter coming and possible heavy winds, we need to make some decisions as to what we're going to do with that. And if you'll recall, the Windjammer Park Improvement Plan indicated that in a future phase that windmill was going to be relocated. So we have 4 different options to consider right now, and the first is to just remove the entire thing and rebuild it at a different location in the future. We can remove all of the exterior paddles and features. and leave that building in place with the understanding that a new windmill would be constructed at another location in the future. Or we can design and make necessary structural repairs so that it remains in its current configuration. Or we can leave the windmill as is and provide sufficient fencing to protect the public from falling debris, which may require a 60-foot radius around it, which would go the fencing would go almost all the way to the lagoon. So this work was unanticipated and not included in the budget, so we're going to need to find funds if we want to make those kinds of repairs, or even to rent fencing on a long-term basis. So we thought we'd bring this forward to get a sense from you as to your feelings on how we should proceed.
Councilor Munns.
Thank you, Mayor. Put a fence around the windmill, look like it's in prison. It's kind of like the sad shape that the A6 was down on the beach. That's just wrong. I do happen to know that Shorty DeYoung, who lives in town, was one of the original builders and bricklayers around that. And he might, I don't know if someone has hidden plans or whatever, but I can't see, I mean, if we have to just for emergency, but no, we're not keeping a fence around it. That's just wrong.
So
I'm sorry, you can't do that.
An interesting factoid, Hank Neidham's family actually brought the plans over from Holland for that.
Perfect.
And we do have a set of the original plans for it, so.
Which is what helped us with the initial review from building department staff to get a sense of what they were looking at in terms of the different beams. And I think that was also helpful for the structural engineer when they looked at it. But we do have an issue that we have to address, and it's kind of either it's in prison or we have to do something about it.
Well, can I follow up?
Follow up. Fine.
I mean, we need to do some research, and our finance director help us see if there's any money anywhere, but I don't want to leave it indefinitely in a prison. Either move it or repair it where it is, depending on how the park goes. If you're tearing it apart, then it would be easy to move it maybe to a better location that enhances it and the park. I mean, it used to be kind of being in the center of the park, and now it's kind of hidden. But I think we need to find out money, if there is any, and what we can do.
Okay.
But that's my feeling.
Councilor Wassinger.
Oh, yes.
Can you remind us, just real quick, is that location in, I don't have a map in front of me, phase 1, phase 2 of Windjammer Park plan?
It is not in phase 1. We specifically have
Yes.
the phase 1 line
Yes.
excludes that.
Okay. So
And
the-
I think that the idea of having something like that at that roundabout traffic circle over at Beeksma would have put that in phase 3 maybe?
Yes, I think that.
Or 2. But we have looked, I think, remember, you might recall that Joe Stowell walked you through how big a traffic circle would really have to be.
Yes.
And it would be prohibitively large. And so I think the idea of relocating that over to there in a traffic circle isn't going to work out for us. Do we want to try to put it someplace else? That's a different question.
I guess my point was that if this is not in phase 1 and it's not in our immediate, we know, like, we're seeing the 60%, 90% drawings of phase 1 and the goal of doing phase 1 and that construction work, excluding what's going on with it now, it was not to touch it. Is that a correct assumption?
Yes.
So it was to just stay through phase 1 where it is. Well, we have a problem now. I agree. I would rather not see a fence in Windjammer Park, even through the craziness that we're going through in Windjammer Park now. I would not like a fence. It makes sense to me. Maybe not. Like Ms. Munn said, I would like to see the finances and see what it would cost maybe to repair. And I don't know if we can do that without getting a bid and going through all of that work and process. That might not be reasonable either, now that I'm thinking about it out loud. But if the plan is to move it, if that's what what we ultimately would like to do, it would make sense to me to take it down, as much as I would hate to see it come down, because I think it's beautiful. It's certainly not going to be beautiful with a fence around it and falling on people. So I would lean towards either taking it down to save to put somewhere else, or and fix as we rebuild it, for sure, or if there was an easy process, and I just don't know what that would be, to see about getting it repaired. But we're in our budget cycle. I just can't see that being something feasible for us. I mean, I don't know. So I lean more towards just taking it down and saving it to find a good spot for and rebuilding it.
Councilor Campbell?
Thank you. When the pieces fell off the windmill, did we inspect the rest of it to make sure that nothing else was coming down?
Yes, we did.
And that's why we have the fence around it, was because of those inspections gave us that cautionary note that
Okay.
we should put the fence around it in case other pieces come down.
And there, you can see from the photos in your packet, there is some rot
Yeah.
in some of those large members.
Then I submit to you that any question about budget and money is sort of moot. We need to spend some money on it just to keep it safe for the citizens. Because if somebody goes down there, unbeknownst to everybody, and climbs over the fence or does something like that and gets hurt, we're liable. So we probably should ask our finance director if we have emergency funds or something that can take care of that before we do anything major. Thank you.
Councilor Servadius?
So all along through the whole Windjammer Park integration plan, as you mentioned, we've looked at relocating this, and we use the term move, but I think we've also determined it's not necessarily cost effective to move it. It would probably be more cost effective to rebuild it. And if we have plans, that's great. But like anything, a remodel or a restoration is much more expensive sometimes than just rebuilding the structure. When you look at these pictures, I like the screwdriver and the Leatherman that's buried in a 8x12 timber all the way to the hilt. So that would be very I won't say prohibitive, but intensive to rebuild those large beams and fans. And I'm hard pressed to put any more money in that. And so the next question for me would be, is it more cost effective to just strip those dangerous elements off and leave a building standing there? Or if we have a crew and a truck and gear out there, do we just take the building down with the known intent? I've often thought when the ball fields, not if, but when the ball fields get relocated, when, we're going to get there, that could be a central theme of a park down, it could be a real iconic element in the center of that area or somewhere else in the park. I don't know if the roundabout, based on those discussions, if that's still viable or not, but I'm hard pressed to put money into this when we know, I think it actually sits right about where that sidewalk comes down at the edge of phase one and the future stage or a staging area goes there. So if you were to put, I don't know, $20, $30, $40, $50,000 into renovating this thing, that's $20, $30, $40,000 that could go towards the stage and other improvements in the park, and then get this moved to a better permanent location. Thank you, Mayor.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This windmill is one of the remaining iconic structure in Oak Harbor. And it's been there for quite a long time, at least 34 years since I arrived in Oak Harbor. I think it behooved for us to move forward in either repairing it or restoring it to the original position, original design, or what Mr. Servatius has suggested, to rebuild it. But at least let's keep the windmill, repair, restore, or rebuild to preserve the iconic windmill and preserve the heritage of the Dutch heritage. So,
Councilor Heisen?
Thank you. I agree wholeheartedly, both with Joel and Danny. Everybody, actually. I'm really not a fan of the fence. And if it's a safety issue, I definitely think we should take down anything that can fall, obviously. But if we know we're going to either move or rebuild it, I don't think it makes sense at this juncture to disassemble it and store it to expend that cost. So if it were me, if it were my windmill, I would remove anything that's unsafe, leave the rest of it where it is, and then if and when we decide to relocate or rebuild it, at that time we could take it apart, maybe even reclaim part of the original windmill when we build a new one, something like that. But I don't think we need to make this any harder than it needs to be, if that
Well, in
makes
that vein, I
sense.
think I'd like to help just a little bit, because several council members have talked about the concept of moving it or rebuilding. I think originally, when we first started on the Windjammer concept, we contemplated the idea of being able to move the structure lock, stock, and barrel.
Right.
But if you notice in your options, you don't see that listed. So I think staff has concluded that moving the structure, essentially picking it up like you move a house, that's not going to work. And so our choices really are to rebuild, to build a new one
Right.
at a different location. That's really where I think you're headed with this. And so I think the short-term choice is, do you take off the pieces which have the opportunity to fall, potentially hurt somebody, and just leave the body of the windmill until we're ready to build a new
Right.
feature someplace else, or do you take the whole thing down?
Right, and I'm under no delusion that we could pick it up and move it, whether cost effective or physically possible. So when I say relocate or move, I mean as much of the material as
Okay.
possible to maybe help build a new one.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's not realistic, as nice of an idea as it would be.
Councilor Servadius?
Thank you. So out of those four options, I would go for number one. You know, if you look at the base of that structure, it's cinder block. I don't think that was a Dutch building material, but it's a cinder block base with some, I think they're real, they may be, what's it called, hardy plank shingles up above. And let's just think for a moment, what is that going to look like with the fans and the upper structures? We've already taken off the two big beams that were sticking out. Now if we strip the rest of the white off, it's going to be a little octagonal thing out there with a pointy top, and I'm not sure that's any more aesthetically pleasing than just doing a little bit of marketing and PR to let the public know what's occurring, even though we keep talking about it, but maybe to let them know that, you know, it is a concern from a safety standpoint. And, you know, for me, like I said, if we've already got crews out there, trucks, is it that much more just to take down the base of it? And with the intent that I fully agree with Mr. Pagao, I think it could be a very central iconic element somewhere. We just need to find the right place for that. So I'm for number one.
Any other discussion, input? Okay, do you, staff?
I think we're good, Mayor, thank you.
Okay.
Yes, thank
Okay. We are now on to Development Services. Joint Planning Area Amendments. Item number A.
You'll notice the haste by which my friend Kathy is leaving me.
Yeah. I did notice that.
Yeah.
Smart person.
Yeah, she's no dummy, that's for sure. So, I've actually been a little conflicted as to how best to tackle this topic for you today. It's clearly a follow-on to our conversation from last Tuesday. And so really, I have the exact same PowerPoint available to us that we can use as a discussion tool. I can go back to those slides if we need to. So what I'd like to do is maybe just bring you up to speed on a couple of things which have happened since we last met on this topic. And then really, my goal is to hear comments and questions from you folks that I can try to help you with as we start to, or as you start to rather, shape your opinion towards what you may want to support for a JPA proposal to the county. I mean, that's really where we're headed with this thing. So, couple of quick things. We did receive a letter from the county with Monday's date on it. I've left a copy, or actually Nicole left a copy for you at your spaces at the dais. Not a surprise, the county gave us heads up that they were sending a letter to us. I'm also not surprised that they'd like us to choose between the two options that we proposed. If I was in their shoes, I'd do the same thing. So, but we started with 2 options so that we could give them an idea that we're flexible in terms of what that expanded JPA might look like. So they're asking for us, or actually the council eventually, to narrow it down to a single proposal. And they're also asking us to provide some additional analysis that supports that proposal. Obviously, the analysis part is our heavy lifting to do on your part. So we have a letter from the county that's asking us to do a little bit more. The other thing that we left at your spot at the dais are some updated maps. The boundaries of the proposed options, option A and option B, have not changed. All we've done is to beef up the street names so that they're easier to read. We had comments from a couple of you, as well as from 1 or 2 planning commissioners, that it was just a little difficult to read the JPA maps with the street names as small as what they were. So if you look at that option A map, you can now see, for instance, where Baldo Road is, and you can see more clearly Monroe Landing, and which street is the highway, and Hasty Lake Road, et cetera, et cetera. The same, of course, is true for option B. So that's the second piece of sort of update information for you. The third piece is that we had our Planning Commission meeting last night, and so we briefed the Planning Commission just like we did you last week, using that same PowerPoint, gave them the same background, and got them thinking about this boundary as well. I would say that Planning Commission had just some general comments and questions, nothing too in-depth. They wanted to understand our rationale for the boundaries, and just had a couple other questions about what does it mean to properties inside of the JPA. Another question was whether or not the JPA has to be sized from a capacity standpoint like an urban growth area does. As a reminder, the answer to that question is no. It's not governed by GMA in terms of you can only have your UGA as large as what your capacity needs are. We don't have that same kind of language with JPA. There's a lot more flexibility for the city and the county to size it to match our respective needs. So we're not bound by hard and fast rule. And then even though we had some public in attendance last night, there were no public comments on the JPA item. So I guess I'm not going to go through these slides unless the council has questions about how we got to where we are, and then I'm happy to touch base with any of these particular slides. This is a reminder of what our existing joint planning area looks like. It's the area that has the brighter colors and outlined in the dark black line. This was that blow-up map that showed you the southern area on the southern boundary of the existing JPA and the area that we're contemplating for the expansion of the JPA. This slide gave you that indication of what do we go about, what's our thought process when we're thinking about establishing a JPA, what are the characteristics of land inside of it, what are the designations that might apply based upon those characteristics of land. And then we had those 2 options for you. Option A, which was the one with the larger boundary that went farther to the west, down to the Eves Preserve boundary that became the southernmost portion, and then option B, which used the same southern boundary but was significantly smaller in scale and did not go as far to the west. Mayor?
The red line on that map behind you, that looks like it was meant to go around the other area, option A, but you didn't extend it up. See that red line?
Yes, sir.
Is that what that is?
That red line is the Eves Preserve boundary.
Oh, that's Evie, okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And so using one of the policies that are in the countywide planning policies, which talks about the need to maybe think about land uses around sensitive uses in a particular way, that's why at the staff we proposed taking the JPA all the way down to that boundary so that the city and the county would be thinking about that interface. So on this map then, it follows all the way around like this to this point. And this, one of the reasons that we looked at this idea was it gave us three fairly large places where there's some sort of a land bridge connection between the existing JPA and the proposed JPA without getting into the commercial ag land.
So back to the other map.
To this
does-
one here?
Yeah, does
Okay.
EB just go due west?
I think it does right here.
Yeah.
It's just blanked
Okay.
out by the street name.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah. So, what I think I'm really asking for at this point are questions, comments, and thoughts about A or B, or I suppose, is there an option C that you'd like us to think about and somehow prepare for the county?
Council, have any particular questions? Yes, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Power, just to start on the boundary, southern boundary, starting from Misty Lane instead of Waterloo. So that portion between Waterloo and Misty Lane, is that already in joint planning area or that's being left off? Because as far as I know, the city limit is up to Waterloo Lane.
Okay, so, straight by these chairs. So this is the southern boundary of the existing joint planning area. So everything coming down to this line is in the joint planning area. This white gap, if you will, is just land that is in the JPA but outside of our urban growth boundary. So there's no gap in the JPA. This is just, our current urban growth boundary stops right here, and this land is in our joint planning area. So we're not leaving a space between the existing and the proposed.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Councilor Munson?
Thank you, Mayor. For as slow as it takes to change designation, go for the big part. I mean, we don't have to move fast, but the point is, the wheels go so overly slow that I would go for option A and not B. And then depending on how events come, but we get cut off. We think of plans, we think of how we're going to go, and then it's like, oh, wait a minute. County doesn't have that part. I mean, when we were trying to do the FACMA stuff, we got kind of cut off pretty quick. So if they're asking which one, go for A. Go big, bigger. So, and then we can decide how fast or what is needed. But we just, yeah. That's it. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilor Servadian?
Thank you. I agree with Ms. Munns. I think the EB's Landing Historical Reserve is a natural eventual boundary that we have to solve Oak Harbor's issues north of that boundary line. In your experience, has it ever been if the city applied for an expansion and we gave them A, did they come back with A.5 or something where they say, well,
Negotiation.
or do they go yay or nay based on what we apply for?
We've never done this before,
Oh,
Joel.
perfect.
And so we're going to find out together
Okay.
what our experience is. Yeah.
Thank you. So I would agree with option A. You know, we've lived here just over 20 years, and I understand on Google Earth you can go back and there's archived images. I don't know how far they go back, but I know, you know, since we've lived here, and I've mentioned this before, the amount of growth that we've experienced, Home Depot, Walmart, Starbucks, all of those things, and numerous housing developments. To me, thinking out 20 years, I mean, I remember vividly driving across that bridge 20 years ago like it was yesterday, so I'm nervous about how fast the next 20 go. But looking down the road, I agree with Ms. Munns that somewhere to the west or to the south here is where we're going to solve our future growth needs. And so my vote would be for option A, just to have more options available. Thank you.
Of course, we're not voting today. Just
Right.
for the record, we're not voting today.
Yes, Councilor Wassman?
I would agree. If this is just for a joint planning area to open that conversation up, is what I understand it, in the future with the county. We're not set in stone that this is definite UGA or we can annex. Obviously not. Like, it's not that issue. This is an issue of just in the future being able to have the conversation with the county. I would go with option A as well for those reasons.
Cool.
Thanks.
Well, that sounds like that's what we'll work on then in terms of our formal response back to them. I think process-wise, what they're looking for from staff, they're looking for some feedback here fairly soon. And so we're trying to get them something early next week in terms of a new letter, new analysis, and one or the other maps. And now I think we know which one we'll go ahead and use. And then we will slate this for formal council action as well. I think it's appropriate for the council to take a formal action so that the county knows that this is the one that you support. It does also make sense for you to get a recommendation from the Planning Commission. And so where we're probably going to track with this one, if it still works schedule-wise with the county, and we believe that it does, is we'd ask the Planning Commission to make a recommendation to you on October 10th, and then you could do this on the 17th at your regular meeting. So there would be official council action, but what we'll do is we'll use this conversation as a way to convey to them your informal sentiments at this point. So that's kind of how we think that this will work.
Have we had much comment other than emails, which I've certainly seen several of? I mean, from property owners? Have we had much input?
You know, Mayor, I really don't think that there's been a lot of property owner citizen comment on the JPA.
Okay.
I would say that almost 100% of that has been focused on the next item, the Wright's Crossing UGA application.
Sure, right, okay.
And maybe what happened last night in terms of the public comment is a good indicator.
Okay.
We had about 23 or so citizens in attendance for the UGA last night. Nobody spoke on the JPA. A few of them spoke on the UGA.
Okay. Yeah. One other question. In the letter from the county, I noticed that they say the county would like to better understand the city's needs and anticipated growth patterns. So do you feel like you have what you need now to be able to answer that? Or anticipated growth patterns? I think you've already answered that, haven't you, by submitting both of these maps?
Well, I think that's a great observation, Mayor. I think that's what your staff believes as well,
Okay.
is that at some level we've already answered that question. And we've had a continuing dialogue with the county, and I think I shared this with you on Tuesday night, which is we understand their desire to have information from some sort of action you've already taken about what do we want to do outside of our existing UGA or outside of our existing JPA. But by its very nature, our plans don't go outside of those boundaries, so it's tough for you to have had any action on those because we haven't done any of that work. So in some respects, we're trying to answer a question for them that doesn't have a good answer. But I think what you've given us today is good enough for staff and I to work on a comment letter back to the county.
Thank you. Well, one other, the EB, describe that again. That line is the EB.
EB Preserve line, yes.
Has that changed recently?
Not that I know of, no.
So that line was placed several years ago, and it hasn't moved.
Oh, quite some time ago, right.
Uh-huh.
And that's a interjurisdictional agreement between the county and I think Coopville and National Forest. Is the federal government agency that's involved with that? Maybe Department of Interior.
That does seem to me to be the best, the way the council has that we would match our line to that line, our JPA line.
Well, we think there's some support for that in the countywide planning policies as well. And
Okay,
so
great.
I think it's great that the council sees the logic in that boundary. We also think that we can support that from a policy perspective. Now, I'll be honest that one of the comments that we've informally received from the county is, well, do we necessarily need to go to that boundary in order for us to think about how things happen in that particular area. I don't know whether that means that they think like a buffer zone is something that needs to be held between the preserve line and the JPA line. We'll wait and see how they respond to our next letter and our next map. So just so you know, that comment's out there, but we're working collaboratively with them to figure this out.
Okay.
Mayor?
Yes. Councilor Eisen.
This might be a little redundant, but the letter also says to provide analysis and support for our preferred boundary with consideration to overlay designation criteria found in 3.22, and then proposed boundary meets the criteria established in 3.21. I don't have any of that in front of me, so I don't know what that criteria is, but basically the rationale that the council has proposed is just to allow for more flexibility in our long-range planning. Is that enough of a reason, or if?
No, they're going to need more than that.
Right.
And what we're going to do is we're going to point to the policies that support this simple graphic that I put on the screen for you last week, and here it is again. So what that was intended to show you as well as the audience is that all of these are steps which are working our way towards, you know, the designation of a JPA, right?
Right.
And so the first one, the overarching one, is how do we set that boundary? In summarizing some of those policy statements that the county references in their letter, it should be land which is adjacent to your UGA. It should, to the degree possible, be close to services. It should be connected to transportation, either existing or proposed corridors. To the degree possible, avoid that commercially significant land, again, that commercial ag,
All that
and logical
applies.
boundaries.
Yeah.
So all of that stuff, we think, is pretty easily supported by the boundary we've proposed.
I think so too.
It's a little more challenging when we start talking about the designations inside of it, and that's also part of their comment letter. And that's what the other two boxes here are. Some of the lands by our adopted policies can be designated as priority growth. Some of them can't be because of the adopted policies. But we've suggested to the county in our initial letter that we think there might be some ways to have that conversation. So we're going to figure out, do we need to say that differently? Do we just need to reiterate it? You know, what's the best city response?
Sure. I guess I'm encouraged by the fact that they said, okay, we got options 1 and 2, pick one. Because if one of them wasn't considerable, I don't think they would have asked us to
Good point.
push one forward. So right off the bat, I think, you know, we're on the same page. So thank you.
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. When the county approved the proposed joint planning area, it will start a conversation, as Mr. Washington stated, and will start the planning between the city and the island county. After those plannings were made, this will be incorporated in the comprehensive plan for the next 20 years. When will it start getting incorporated in the comprehensive plan?
Well, the first step, Mr. Pagao, is to get it in, is to get something that both jurisdictions can approve. And then I would imagine what would happen is that once we're in agreement, typically the county staff likes the county commissioners to take the first action. And so they would approve a map, and then we would ask you to approve the same map that they approved. Our paths are going to part a little bit then, because they will have a different process in terms of how they deal with that in their comp plan as opposed to us. They have a lot more stuff in their comp plan that relates to joint planning areas because it has a greater amount of significance from the rural perspective, and because they have more than one, right? Because they have other jurisdictions. So we would look to add it, to update the information in our comp plan, probably not in the 2018 cycle, probably in the 2019 cycle, because I don't think that we will have this figured out in time to get it in the 2018 cycle. But that timeline doesn't affect us or hurt us in any way, because it's nothing that we will be having to work with long before that time. Yeah.
So the city has plenty of time before working on the comp plan for the next 20 years, incorporating this.
This is, I mean, as the council's already pointed out, this is not an area that we're talking about UGAs other than the application that's currently pending. It's not an area where we're going to see active development from a city perspective for quite some time. And so getting it into the comp plan in the 2019 cycle is probably sufficient. Now, if for some reason we come to those agreements quickly enough this year and we can make it happen in the 2018 cycle, we'd absolutely do that. And our cycle starts a little later than the county cycle, so that's a possibility.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Powers.
Okay. Anyone else on joint planning area? Okay.
All right, well, thanks for your input on that one.
We'll move to our final topic for today's workshop, and that is item number B, Wright's Crossing Urban Growth Area Expansion.
Well, some of the same introductory comments. This is a follow-on from last Tuesday when we gave you your initial formal briefing on this particular application. I have the same PowerPoint available for me this afternoon, so any of those slides we can use just like we did the other evening. Again, some quick updates. This application, as well as the other portions of the county's potential docket, were considered by the Island County Planning Commission on Monday afternoon. That body voted 5-1 to exclude this application from their 2018 comprehensive plan docket. So just like our planning commission, that's a recommendation. Their recommendation, of course, goes to the Board of County Commissioners. County commissioners will take that up potentially at their October 18th meeting, I'm told by county staff. It's also possible that it could take place at their November 1st meeting. Not too sure which one that'll occur just yet. You might recall as a footnote that we have a fairly detailed schedule that was all built around the idea that the county would hit that first available date for them, which was the 18th. So that was one part of the update, is that the County Planning Commission met on Monday. Another piece of information is that we met with our Planning Commission last night. So just like on the JPA, we briefed them on the UGA. We used the same PowerPoint that we did for you. And we got a number of comments and questions from the Planning Commission, and I'll just give you the topic areas that they were interested in. They had questions about process, just like you folks did, questions about the buildable lands analysis, its sufficiency. Does staff think it's flawed or not? Because there's been some community conversation on that. Before I forget, there was some material left at your places this afternoon. It was a study or a review that was commissioned by the North Puget Sound Association of Realtors. It was done by a consultant, and it was a review of the buildable lands analysis that the county conducted. This came to you by way of one of the local realtors. I believe they've been in contact with Joel and asked the question, how do they get it in front of you? So we coordinated with Nicole to have that happen. I'll tell you that staff has a copy of this as well. County gave it to us on Monday after it was presented to them at their Planning Commission meeting. So we haven't had a chance to go through it, so I can't speak intelligently to it this afternoon. I just know that we have it. And then the other comments and questions from the Planning Commission last night, quite a bit circling around the topic of affordable housing or housing affordability, and those are sort of two separate conversations which seem to be taking place. Lots of questions and comments about infrastructure and traffic. How would a potential project like this be served by the city? And then some general comments from some of the planning commissioners that they thought additional study of the idea, additional conversation about this was warranted. As I mentioned, we did have about 22 people in attendance last night. 5 of those spoke, 4 of them in opposition, and 1 of them was undecided. Just had some questions, some of the same things that I've listed off for you. This gentleman had those same kinds of questions. Tim, can we go to that other, there's another PowerPoint in there with the housing numbers. Yes, thanks. So another thing that happened last night at Planning Commission is one of our commissioners did have some questions about housing and what kind of housing has been built recently. And by recently, they gave us a 5-year time frame. So we were able to throw together some quick numbers yesterday. Lisa Felix and Ray Lindenberg and Lisa Beebe did a great job. And then today they outdid themselves and they updated it some more, picked up some additional units that we hadn't included in our work yesterday, and put it all in a PowerPoint that I think will be pretty understandable. The goal of this was just to answer that question, but it's also to help the council and the community understand where we have seen housing take place within the last 5 years in terms of the type of housing. It gives you an idea of the scale of projects that we have been dealing with. And as I get to another slide, ones which haven't materialized yet, but ones which people have asked us questions about housing projects. So we only went back 5 years, and I won't read all of these to you, but you can see the first part of the screen is single-family projects, or the top portion of the slide. These are either subdivisions or short plats, land division of some kind. The potential number of units, the year that that project was approved, and the status. So kind of interesting is we've got some that are currently in plan review. Council will certainly remember the Marin Woods project, which was approved last year. That plat was approved. The applicant has not yet progressed to the point of being ready to build those homes, and et cetera, et cetera. So some we've got construction underway, we've issued building permits, some that fell within that 5-year timeline, the construction is already complete. Mayor, this may be helpful for some of the questions that you had for me last week. I think these slides will answer those questions for you.
It is, certainly. Thank you.
Multifamily projects, the same organizational system there. This Highland Park one is kind of interesting and in a planner kind of way, kind of exciting. That subdivision, which was approved back and actually started before 2012, but got to the final stage of approval in 2012, has been just sitting dormant ever since it was approved. They got the lots created, the streets are in, the utilities are in, and nothing has happened. Market, just all sorts of issues. We have, as you can see, 8 building permits are ready to issue because somebody has that land under a contract. And we have a new owner in the wings who's getting ready to close on that and start construction. And those are actually either duplexes or triplexes, depending upon the properties that they're dealing with. But they are actually, I shouldn't call them that, but that's how the buildings are grouped. But they are individual single-family units, but they're attached. So Island Place is one which has had multiple phases, or at least it did originally. Now it's been boiled down to 2 phases. And we, by our standards, been going pretty gangbusters in there for the last year or so. I think there are only 6 units which are left to issue in that particular project. And then you can see the other projects as well. We've got some others that are currently in review. Infill lots. So there are 10 that we've been working on over the course of this year. 3 of those are complete. 2 of them are construction is underway. The permits have been issued. And when we're talking about infill, what we're really talking about are those usually those sorts of 1s and 2 kind of lots around town. So they're not part of a subdivision. The distinction here is that the ones that have the bearing address, those are over here on the side of the hill, still technically infill because they're inside of the sort of the core of the city, but they're different than, say, the ones on Northeast O'Leary that are listed there. They don't yet have street addresses. Those are just 2 lots which have long been vacant lots on O'Leary. So goal of that slide is to demonstrate that we do see some activity in this area. And then we've had some pre-applications, and to us that has a very specific meaning. For the council, what that might mean is to determine feasibility. right? So this is, somebody comes to us and says, I'm thinking about building a project X on this particular piece of property. I'd really like to understand the rules before I commit all of my money to going forward on this thing. And that's what our pre-application process is for. You give us a basic amount of information, we review it against all of our different codes and standards, and we try to give you good information, particularly on those showstoppers or those big ticket items that you should know about before you decide to go forward with the project or not. And so we've conducted a number of pre-apps in the last couple of years for single family and multifamily. You might say reasonably, well, those projects are ones that they've talked about, but they haven't moved into fruition yet, and that's absolutely true. But what we can never tell is when they will come back to us, and that's part of the process, which is kind of a black box to us. We can't see what's going on, but what we do know as a general rule is when the number of pre-apps start to increase, the number of actual projects will increase as well. We start to see more of those projects materialize. And so we have some single-family pre-apps that are mostly short plats. A couple of those are fairly old. One of them is brand new. In fact, it's just down the hill here on Barrington. And then for the multifamily, going back just 2 years, a fair number of units. This Mirabella Square one is phase 2 of a project which was previously constructed. That's on Ely. And so that one is, yes, it was a pre-app because we wanted to make sure that we gave them the most up-to-date information, but that one's pretty close to being ready to move into an actual project should they decide to go forward. I think that's the last slide on that one. Yep. So that's just to share. Can we go back to the other presentation, please? Just to share with council some of the numbers. Those are updated numbers for the ones we provided the commission last night. So one of the last comments from me then, and we've talked about this before, the county process for review of the Wright's Crossing application will require a resolution from City Council. Because as you might remember from Tuesday evening, there's a policy in the countywide planning policies that and I'm paraphrasing, the county won't approve an application initiated by a private party unless the City Council expresses your support for that. Policy would sort of lead you to believe that that comes after the county has done a fair amount of work. The way they've set up their process for this year is that they're asking for that in advance of them putting it onto the docket. As you heard me say previously, we've built our schedule around that. We've also taken a stab at drafting a resolution that meets what we believe the county's requirements are. We've included that as one of our attachments to this agenda bill so that you get a sense of what that is. We could potentially have this available for you on the 3rd, but we could also do it on the 17th. Both of those would obviously be in advance of the 18th. So I think that's about all I will say on that, although I will say that we do have some members of the public in the audience, Mayor. We did anticipate that you might want to take some public comment today, so you might want to ask for that as part of the council's conversation.
Yeah, I think we don't normally do that, but how does the council feel about that? Okay? Okay. So I don't have the direction, but obviously if you'd like to make public comment, we'd like you to please come to the microphone. Limit your comments to 3 minutes, and give us your name, please, if you'd like to make any public comment at this time.
I'm Rick Schutte, the owner of Coochie Real Estate here in Oak Harbor, and I just, again, want to apologize to you all for my overly enthusiastic response the other night. I'm very passionate about our community, and that, I think, came forth. I want to congratulate you on what your decision today, or not a decision, but your thought process on the JPA. I think that extending it as far as possible is a wise decision. I see Oak Harbor, North Whidbey, and NAS Whidbey Island as the economic drivers, the economic engine to our community, to all of actually Whidbey Island as well as the surrounding areas. And really believe that we need to consider that for our growth. When I look at the EB's reserve and I think about the Camino Island conservation districts, everything's just moving north, and I'd hate to see us get locked in too close to the city limits. I would like to see us, and I recommend to you all that we expand this UGA, and I would ask that you be in favor of that. And if Wright's Crossing is part of that, give them the opportunity to prove the steps, to walk through their steps, and to see if these things can be done. If not, so be it. If they can overcome the traffic situations, great. If not, so be it. If they can overcome all the other questions that the public has asked, great. If not, so be it. But let's not take them out of the picture. I think that they're very experienced. They have deep pockets. They're willing to absorb a lot of the costs that would normally be the city's. And I believe it would enhance the city's bottom line for some of the things that are going to be built that would then be turned over to the city. So I say thank you. And if you need to put a windmill someplace right on top of my building, it'll be a great place for the time being.
Careful what you wish for. Thank you, Mr. Schutte. Okay, other public comment? Yes.
Good afternoon. My name's Hal Hovey. I'm a resident of Oak Harbor as well as a member of the Oak Harbor City Planning Commission. I'll give you the executive summary of some of my comments from last night. First thing is regarding the JPA, I am an advocate of making it as big as possible. If it was my preference, it would be from the border of the EB Reserve all the way north to the Deception Pass Bridge. I think it would be naive to assume that any decisions that are made by the county on North Whidbey don't affect either the planning capability of the city of Oak Harbor or the economic driver of the city of Oak Harbor. So we may not want to develop parts of North Whidbey, but that doesn't mean that their retention as rural areas isn't critical to the economic survival of the base, which is the economic driver of our community. The other comment about this particular UGA expansion, I would just like to say that I think it's, again, naive to assume that infill is a way to solve the affordable housing problem. It's just not economically viable to assume that builders are going to be able to build affordable housing in the community on those infill lots. They're just too expensive. A lot of them are view properties or even, in a few cases, waterfront properties, and it's not going to happen. I'm concerned, as Mr. Schutte said, about us becoming landlocked in our borders and not having the expansion capability to build affordable housing. That's happened in Anacortes, and the median price for homes built in 2017 in Anacortes is $622,450. In Oak Harbor, for brand new construction in 2017, the median price is $357,250. There's 0 houses on South Whidbey priced below $300,000 that were built in 2017. There's 0 houses on North Whidbey below $300,000 built in 2017. There's 1 house on all of Whidbey Island built in 2017 that was priced below $300,000 for new construction. So if we want to solve the affordable housing problem, relying on infill lots is not going to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hovey. Anyone else? Public comment? Okay, seeing none. Council, any other? Yes, Councilor Wassinger.
More about the order of all of these different bodies in the county and our bodies in the city coming to make their different recommendations. So I understand what you said, that the county's planning commission, is that what they're called? That's what they're called, had their meeting and voted to not include it in the next docket, if you will. Is that the right terminology? So why were we as a council supposed to do our planned resolution in support or not, or whatever we as a body decided before the county's commission made their recommendation?
Before the county commissioners made their decision.
What about before the county planning commission made their decision? So they weren't looking for our input then, the planning commission was not?
Not to my knowledge.
That would not have made a difference in their thinking, or that doesn't make sense to me. You would think that they would want to take into consideration that body, our bodies, and what about, I mean, just thinking about it in a logical way, it would seem that the county planning commission to make their decision to their superiors, I suppose would be the county commissioners, would want if the county is really wanting our input, if they really want a resolution from us, I don't understand why that body didn't want it first. And then I also had a question, our city planning commissioner, or planning committee, no, my words are getting all confused, are they supposed to make a recommendation to us to do a resolution in support of this? Because it seems to me that the timing is getting behind. And then maybe it's not making sense to me, the order of who's supposed to be driving who, or what bodies are supposed to be giving their support. I feel like somewhere there's a disconnect. You could help me understand.
Yeah, those are really good questions, and I can see that. And I really should have brought my whiteboard in today, because it would have been fun to draw for you folks. But I'll do my best to use word pictures instead.
Okay.
The county's application process, which they revised this year, actually sets out that the way that they intended it to work is that before the applicant submits their application to the county, they have already come to the city and gotten several things from the city, one of which is a resolution from the council supporting a particular project.
Wait, I'm sorry, can I stop you there?
Yeah, please.
Can I? So the applicant, who
Any
sorry.
applicant. So in this case,
the
it would have
person
been-
who applied for
Right.
the
So in this case, it would have been,
expansion of the UGA.
Right.
In this case, it would have been Wright's Crossing.
Wright's
and
Crossing.
Whoever it was. Should
Right.
so the policy is that they were to ask us for a resolution for.
well, that's what the county's new application process says.
Okay.
The challenge, though, for them as well as for the applicant is that, as I understand, they got that application done right around the beginning of July. But the deadline for submitting the applications was August 1st. So not a lot of time to have that happen. And so county acknowledged that and said, you know what, you're right, that's a challenging place to put you. And so they informed Wright's Crossing that they wouldn't need that resolution from the Oak Harbor City Council with the application. It could come after they submitted the application on August 1st. Okay? Similarly, they had required that the city provide them formal comments on the application. And they had thought in the way they'd lined out the process that we should be commenting on the application before it's even submitted to the county. They also recognized that that wasn't going to work in that timeline, and that's where you may have heard of an August 28th date that we were required to provide comments, and we met that deadline. Let me just take a quick aside here for a moment. We've talked to the county staff, and we've said, we understand why you might want it to work this way, but what you're really asking us to do is to have formal comment and council action on something that we don't even know is really an application yet at the county. And that doesn't make a lot of sense to us, and I think to their credit, they understood what our perspective is. So once we get done with this chunk of things, I think we're going to talk some more about how that should work for next year. Okay, so now I'm going to come back to where we are today, okay? So they set out a timeline, but they acknowledged that wasn't going to work, and they gave us some other targets to hit. Number one was formal comments on the application, staff comments by August 28th. We did that. They've told us that they need your resolution before the county commissioners will put it on the docket, if in fact that's what they want to do. So this schedule was put together with the idea that we would beat that initial date that we were told that the county might take action. And I will add that we originally didn't have this date. So we were told we needed a resolution, but we didn't know what date we were trying to hit. And that was making it hard for us to develop our schedule. The other part of your question, I think, was wouldn't you ordinarily get formal input from your planning commission before you would make a recommendation? The answer to that question, I think, is yes. Ordinarily, you would do that. And the draft resolution we prepared for you sort of acknowledged that's the normal sequence of events. And that sequence could still happen if the council wants to take your action on October 17th, because this date, October 10th, we've scheduled a special planning commission meeting for our city planning commission to conduct a public hearing on both the JPA and on the UGA. And they will forward that recommendation to you. That's the 17th. But we're also sensitive to the fact that the council has heard comment, maybe some from the county, maybe some from the community, that the resolution, that time is of the essence, that you need to send your message sooner rather than later. And so it was drafted to acknowledge that unusual set of circumstances, and if the council feels compelled to respond to those unusual circumstances, then you could do it on October 3rd. We would add it to your agenda.
Well, I feel like, should I as a council member be saying I'm getting my info from the Whitby News Times? But they are saying that the planning commission, that the county commissioners, there's an October 4th work session that they could possibly, consider this or consider their recommendation during that session. And I'm not a county expert by any means, but would we need to get them our resolution before that October 4th work session?
So I knew that was going to be a question, and I specifically contacted our primary staff person at the county that we're working with, and she assured me that that's not the case, that what they will do on that October 4th work session is to talk to the commissioners about what date do they want to consider their decision on the docket, and do they wish to conduct their own public hearing. They're not required to do their own public hearing because the county planning commission's already done that. And so at the October 4th date, they will just consult with the commissioners. They'll probably brief them on what happened at the planning commission, and then figure out, do they want to go on the 18th or on the 1st, and do they want to have a public hearing or not? And that's what the information I got on Tuesday morning. Because I'd had a similar comment from somebody, and so we followed up on it Tuesday morning.
Thank you.
Let me just add one thing. There's nothing normal about some of these, how these pieces are going, so these are really good questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Councilman.
Thank you, Mayor. Could we get those new slides that you had today? They were very helpful in comparing them to some other packet material, the new ones that you just put up about what permits have been done since 2014.
Tim, can we go to the other one, please? The ones with the numbers.
If you could just make sure that we have it.
Oh, I'm sorry. You want to see them? Oh, yes,
No.
yes. I'm sorry.
It's just they're very helpful because then we could look back and forth between the two.
And we know that you really like that stuff in your packet. Literally, like 1:45 is when we got that one
I
done.
commend staff for going beyond up and beyond their effort in trying to get that done for last minute as much as they could. So that was tremendous work by them to be able to fill it in even more. So I appreciate that, but I would like to have
Sure.
that as a
We'll make
copy.
sure that everybody gets an electronic copy of that.
The other thing is I don't know with the resolution, whatever, buildable land. It's in a project for sewer in my neighborhood. What they consider buildable, they used a formula that's apparently very popular to use. They just looked at lot sizes. They had no idea where the house was, where the garage was, where they said someone could add 2 more houses. It ain't gonna happen. Because of where their house is and their garage and a guest house and a swimming pool, all they looked at was the property. And so there is a big, what word am I looking for?
Disconnect.
Yeah, disconnect between what they think is buildable and not. And, you know, I'd be willing to go around if I had a list of street and take pictures of properties that they have down as buildable, that when you look at it, it's like, unless they take everything off the land, then maybe you could have the 3 or 4 houses on it. And so I guess that concerns me, that they just assume that we have more buildable land than we really do.
So do you mind if I comment towards that?
Yes,
Because
please.
I think that's a common misconception, and I'd like to dispel that just a little bit. First of all, I actually recall this sort of scenario you're talking about in your neighborhood, and that was for the appraisal process for a sewer LID. And that was a flaw in how that process evolved and ultimately led to the death of the LID. And initially, that's where our county partners started as well. They started with our common lot size here in Oak Harbor is 7,200 square feet. If you're going to do just a regular single-family lot with no bells and whistles, you've got to hit a 7,200 square foot lot. And so where they started with was if you have 2 times the size of 7,200 square feet, that meant that there was the capacity for 1 more unit on that property. And we said, whoa, wait a minute. That's not going to work for some of the very issues that you've just outlined, Beth. And as we talked to them, and this was as we were working on the first version of these countywide planning policies, so more than a year and a half ago, they understood that our concern there. Because we pointed out this very same thing. And what we did was we used Google Earth and our subdivision information and some GIS assessors information, and we just did spot checks around the community. And we chose, I think, half a dozen or 10 areas and drew a 500-foot circle and looked inside of those as to which of these single-family lots would that initial county approach say would be subdividable or create an extra lot. And we found lots of instances where the house is in the middle of the lot. And so yes, while there's more than twice the area of the minimum lot size, the house is positioned where you couldn't possibly carve off a second lot. Maybe it was an irregular shaped lot. So again, you couldn't carve off a second lot and have it really work. Maybe there was nothing wrong with the shape. The house was up towards the front, towards the street. So far things are going well, but the width of the lot isn't wide enough to allow a driveway to go on either side of the house to get to the back where the new lot would be. And so we pointed out all of these circumstances to the county. And that's why we ended up with this table in the countywide planning policies that applies a discount towards the lands which we are counting. And so if a lot is 2 to 2.5 times the minimum lot size, 75% of those lots, that area that we see out there, we're not going to count that. We're going to push that off to the side, and our methodology then assumes that only 25% of that area will be developing as single-family homes in a 20-year horizon. So the smaller that lot relationship, the fewer we're going to count. If the lot in question is a little over 2.5 times to 3 times the size, we're going to discount 50% of those. We're going to say we're not going to count on those developing because we can't count for timing, we can't count for property owner preference, we can't count for a number of factors. So we're just going to say that's our discount factor. So we're only going to count 50% of that potential capacity as being available in the 20-year horizon. When you get to something that's 3.1 to 3.5 times the size of the minimum lot, it's starting to get fairly good size now. Our theory is that the chances of that short platting are becoming more likely. And so then we're going to count 75% of that opportunity. We're still going to discount a quarter of them. We're going to throw those away, so we're not going to count those. And then finally, if it's over 3.5 times the minimum lot size, we're going to say that 85% of those opportunities will take place in a 20-year horizon. This is our attempt, the cities and the counties, to deal with that question that you've talked about. So I realize that was a long explanation, but I really wanted to cover this so that the council and the community know that we're not counting every single square inch of land as being developable. We've made what we think is a reasonable effort to discount a lot of that possibility.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilor Surveys.
Thank you. Will you bring up the slides that Ms. Munns was referencing?
Sure.
While you're doing that, Mr. Hovey, thank you. Those are some of the most straightforward
The number ones.
statistics I think I've heard. I mean, I've heard statistics presented, but I think if anyone in this room was displaced right now from their home for any reason, I think it would be very enlightening to try and go out and find similar housing. And that's to me where some of the empirical boots on the ground data, I just know if most people right now, because I hear stories of people coming in, trying to find a place to rent or to buy, and the numbers I hear are the price points for rent or housing, and they were highlighted by Mr. Hovey's comments. One house in 2017 so far, was that in North Woodby? Under all of Woodby under 300,000. New construction. If that is in fact correct, that's a problem. The average price point you mentioned, if that's correct, 357,000. Clearly a problem. I've had the opportunity, I guess, over some of my peers maybe, to have talked to quite a few of these developers that are listed up here, and I'm as optimistic as I can be, but I would say some of those numbers too might be a bit challenged as far as coming to fruition, just based on the conversations I've had. I'll keep my fingers crossed and hold out hope. I think a better metric might be, and I know we have it, I thought we were going to see that when you started presenting these, was the historical number of units that we've developed over the last 10 years. The annual number of housing starts that we've developed over the last 10 years is quite low annually, and so that concerns me very much. One of the things I keep talking about, and I want to get out in the public, is trying to get as much of this information out there, and I think it was Mr. Schutte might have mentioned it, as far as, since we're talking about the Wright's Crossing application, they want a chance to have their case heard and then be judged based on merit. I didn't bring the article, but I will bring it Tuesday, since a couple people have referenced getting their information from the Whidbey News-Times. Nothing against the Whidbey News-Times. They've had a couple of, I'll call them cursory introductory articles, but there was a letter to the editor today, and this to me highlights the need for information to get out there. And I will bring it Tuesday and read it, but it starts out, can you imagine and one of the things they mentioned is the crime. What is, yeah, I was going to make a, I won't even go there politically, but it's hard not to, about, Mexico importing their best. So when you look at these comments, and people are entitled to make comments, but they should be fact-based. They talk about your taxes. This one in particular reference, can you imagine what the crime rate is going to do? And I was like, wow, that's a leap. That's definitely a leap. So I still, when we look at this resolution, I think, if you haven't had a chance to really vet that resolution, to me it still makes sense, even though the Island County Planning Commissioners voted to exclude it in this current go-round. For me, nothing changes in that resolution, that we really need to look at our buildable lands analysis. And then if there's projects, whether it's Wright Crossing or any other applicant that wants to come up and try and help us solve this problem, there is very much a problem. And I think some of these, nothing against the developers or the builders, but I think some of these numbers are challenged as far as becoming a reality anytime soon. And that's why I said the better metric might be what we've actually done. I know we all I received this over the weekend. You all received it, I think, today, this report or this review letter that was done by a consultant. And I found it fairly fascinating. If you take time, please take time to read this thoroughly. When you look at the comparison that's made between the Island County averages, as far as the mix of single family versus multifamily, and then the actual mix of per capita people that live in each of those dwellings, this too should be vetted like anything else, but I found it fascinating when you try and apply this based on our current capacity. it was a very, very interesting white paper, and I think we need more research like that, and I think there's some possibly more forthcoming. Coming back to the resolution, Commissioner Johnson has asked, I know at least in 2 articles back to back in the paper that she was quoted, possibly 3, I think it was 3 in a row, very clearly, City of Oak Harbor, where are you at? What do you want? And, you know, we could continue to look at that schedule, but I think, Mr. Powers, I asked you earlier, but there's no public hearing required either for a JPA resolution or this current resolution that's referenced in here, 1717, correct?
There's no hearing required from the city's process perspective. You don't need a hearing for a resolution. The county made it clear in their materials that they thought that you would be better served by doing a hearing, but that's your choice, not the county's.
So if there is I feel like we're a little bit behind on this, and I know the timelines have been very compressed because of the application timeline and the new application with the county. Is there a reason we can't have both of these resolutions before us on 10-3 and conduct a public hearing on 10-3? Nothing against our planning commission, but is there any reason that can't occur in here?
Yes, because we can't do enough notice for you before 10-3 for a hearing. What we can do is we can add this to your agenda, to your meeting agenda, because we can do that with what's called our 24-hour notice. That allows us to put something on the agenda as long as we give 24-hour notice, and then you can conduct a meeting. Since you're not bound to do a hearing on a resolution, you could take up the items on 10-3. Also, this council, as well as many councils in Oak Harbor, have taken comment at public meetings just like you have in public hearings. So there's no functional difference. I think the reason the county has suggested hearing is because they wanted to be sure that the public had an opportunity to speak before you made your decision. While I certainly can't choose for you, again, historically, you have taken comment on public meeting items.
Okay. As for me, I would like to see both of these resolutions at the 10-3. That gives clear input to the county on 10-4, even though they may not be spending a lot of their work session on it. And then clearly it's ahead of that 10, I think it was the 10-17 timeline. The other thing I was going to mention in addition to this that I forgot is Senate Bill 5254. If you have not read that, bottom of, I think you were all given a draft here somewhere. That's very interesting as it applies to, I found that very interesting as it applies to the buildable lands analysis. One last thing to touch on, and the other reason I'd like, it is kind of disjointed that Councilmember Wassinger pointed out, for the county to ask for us to provide them a resolution in advance of them accepting a project, and sometimes we may not even know that much about that project, is a bit disjointed. But as I read through this resolution, actually both of these, for JPA potential and or this application, the one thing that stood out as much as anything in Resolution 1717 was the buildable lands analysis that I know we all voted on it. We're not planners, and this is not a knock on staff. We take staff's input and we make the best decision we can, but as I've studied this very hard over the last 6 or 7 months now, it's become very clear to me that we're not getting the job done, and that's really this body up here that's got to take some of those first steps to correct that problem. So I'll raise not just one hand but both hands that, you know, we voted to adopt the countywide planning policies, and embedded in that was the buildable lands analysis, but I think there's definitely some room for improvement there. Thank you.
So I'll just note for the council, because Joel brought up the 5254, which is, I haven't spent a lot of time with that law, but the Department of Commerce did just recently release the RFP because part of that law dictates that Commerce should study buildable lands analyses and see what's working and what's not working. I'm sort of paraphrasing. And so this topic that you're dealing with, that the county's dealing with, the community is dealing with, is something that's not unique to Island County. It's something that's happening certainly in all of Western Washington. I will respectfully say that while it's great that we have questions about buildable lands analysis, it doesn't necessarily mean that there are flaws. It just means that there are questions, and we're happy to help you with those questions. And I do probably have a planner's professional obligation to point out to us that we have an obligation to plan for the whole housing spectrum, and we've had a lot of focus on single family, but we also have to be thinking about the multifamily opportunities. We have to think about all age spectrums, because that's also part of what the law tells us to do. Doesn't discount any of the concerns that you have. I'm just doing the thing that I should do and point some of these things out to you. And then one last thought is, you did mention, Joel, and I appreciate that if you go forward on the 3rd, that means that you're getting out of sync with your planning commission, but that's certainly the council's prerogative to do that.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Powers, on the proposed draft resolution that will be submitted to Island County, it says in part that the draft resolution supports further review of the Wright crossing application and commits the city to certain future actions. These certain future actions is one of those that you have just presented us about infill within the city limits, those already being developed, and those pre-development. Is that part of that future action?
In essence, it is, Mr. Pagao. If the council would look at your packet on page 263, so it's almost, it's the second to last page of the packet. And it's got the, now therefore be it resolved, and there are 8 items listed there. Number 3 says that the council anticipates the consideration of alternative measures to accommodate projected urban growth, to include increasing densities allowed in our UGA or altering the uses allowed in our land use plan and zoning regulations. So what that means is, under state law and under the WACs, if we go through a buildable lands analysis with the county and we determine that additional capacity is needed, we don't get to automatically go to expanding the UGA. The first stop that we have to go through is what's known as an alternative measures analysis, which in essence mean, can we accommodate that additional capacity inside of the existing boundary, which is going to boil down to infill, or at least infill for part of that. We're going to have to look at, can we upzone property, can we change densities, can we change some properties from non-residential to residential in order to create that capacity. And then under the countywide planning policies, we need to share the results of that analysis with the county. We have the obligation to talk to them about it. They have the obligation to listen to us about it. If the answer is yes, we can accommodate all of our stuff by doing those alternative measures, then we don't move on to the step of increasing the urban growth area size. If the answer is no, you can't do that, or you can't get all of what you need by doing that, then that's when we start looking at, can we make the UGA larger?
As a follow-up on that future action, will there be any action that will have significant financial impact to the city besides the city staff time? I know that there will be financial impact, but normally in our, I think it's in a comprehensive plan, like the problem on hearing transportation, and we have tools to remedy this, mitigate it with the transportation concurrency, and but other significant financial impact which does not cover those.
The answer is in parts, I think, Mr. Pagao. The first few of these in the resolution are staff time. So should it get to the point where it moves through the docket process with the county and then we get into the buildable lands analysis, we're going to have to help the county with that, give them current data. We'll have to ground truth it based upon the results that they get. So yes, there'll be staff time for that. Obviously, there would be staff time with the alternative measures. Where you might start to move into real costs beyond the staff costs is that if it gets to the point where now we need to be thinking about how would a proposal affect our water system plan or our transportation plan. those questions won't be ones that normally we would answer ourselves. We would go to outside help to redo those major utility plans. But that would be quite a ways down the road. The initial commitment of resources is your staff time. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Powers.
Yes, Councilor Wassinger.
I have another question. So going through this, if this does make this through the process to expand the UGA, which is what this application is for initially, and then there's time, obviously, between that happening and this is out there. Granted, all the steps happen. City is gonna obviously want to look at annexing it into the city limits. What if
UGA one, please.
when this process is initiated by a private party to do this UGA expansion, if that falls through, or let's say it gets to the point, something happens, the market crashes, who knows, and the development can't be developed, but it's already gone through the process of expanding the UGA. Is that UGA still forever? Those boundaries are drawn and they will stay.
No, actually, there are provisions in the countywide planning policies for shrinking a UGA. Langley just had theirs shrunk as part of their 2016 process. It was oversized. It was larger than the capacity that they needed, and that was from some time ago and some other decisions. And so their UGA got smaller with their adoption of the 2016 comprehensive plan. So it's not a forever thing. It can be drawn back if circumstances warrant it. Yeah.
But only if that was initiated. I mean, once it's done through this application, I guess what I'm saying is because it's a private group initiating it, not the county or us, or, does that mean that even if that private group, something happens and they have to go, or it can't go forward after we've gone through the whole UGA expansion? It'll stay until
The county or the city would have the ability to initiate an action, but that would only be based upon a periodic review, like that once every 8 years review. And if for some reason, if this was the population projections we've been assuming for years, and for some reason that projection goes this way, and now our UGA is too large, we would likely have to downsize it. Now, whether you would downsize it in this area or you'd draw in another piece, who knows? But it would not take, if this is where you're kind of heading, it would not take the original private party to initiate that action, because the county controls that boundary. And so we could petition them for that to happen, or they could say to us, we think this boundary needs to change.
Thank you.
Councilor Heisen.
Thank you, Mayor. A lot of what you guys have said has really resonated with me. I'll start with Erica's comment about getting info from the Whitby News Times. It's the word that keeps coming to mind is off-putting, but I think stressful is more apt. When we're being barraged by feedback from the county, and there's comments in the Whitby News Times about, we might get a resolution, or the council's pushing its agenda, or, we want to know what the council thinks, and the council has not been introduced to this item yet. It's stressful. I'm glad we haven't been asked to make any decisions yet, but we're in a position where we haven't gotten that information. When I read stuff like that, it stresses me out, because I want to make good decisions with lots of info. Having said that, the process makes a lot more sense to me in terms of, because I've been hearing, the county's been waiting for the city to pass a resolution, for months or something to that effect. And it makes sense that we had not been approached because you didn't have any date or a timeline or anything provided to you. So that makes sense as to why we hadn't received that information yet. So.
Well, and if I could just interject,
Yeah.
because there wasn't an application, right? And
Right.
so our world revolves around
Right.
an application. And it's not real until that thing comes.
Right.
And that thing came to the county on the 1st of August.
Right, so it's conceptual until then.
Right.
And, which makes sense. We don't necessarily know that when feedback starts pouring in, right? So, I'm glad that that makes sense now. And I also, I had a question, but I think that was answered in a roundabout way about whether our planning commission made a recommendation last night, but it sounds like they
No.
didn't.
They were introduced to the topic the
Okay.
same way that you were the
Okay.
previous Tuesday.
I would be, personally, I would be more comfortable considering the resolution after our planning commission has had a chance to make a recommendation. I don't know if delaying that another 2 weeks in terms of getting that information to the county, again, with the timeline, how comfortable staff and county and everybody else is with that timeline. I'd like to hear from our planning commission. But again, it's not, I mean, if time is of the essence and the sooner the better, then I wouldn't be opposed to expressing our opinion there. And I also really liked what, Joel, what you said about having this application judged on its merits. At least having the opportunity to be heard, because I think making reactions based on decisions based on knee-jerk reactions or limited information is, it's not the best way to serve a community. So, to put something forward and let it be judged on its merits, I think is the fairest way to do it. I think I had one more thing written. This is just all new information. I appreciate the way that this was presented. Steve, I think that you've done an outstanding job of translating this in a way that we could understand and laying out the actual timeline so that we understand what the steps are and what's expected of us and when, because it is complicated. So, I understood a lot more about this after our last meeting, and I think I understand even more after today. You really were able to tie a lot of that in to what our role is versus just, what was happening. So, thank you. And I appreciate everybody else's observations too. It all makes a lot of sense to me.
Other council input, questions? So I've got a couple of questions. The resolution that is in our packet on page 242 and 243, would you explain that process and the fact that that resolution was delivered?
Sure. We obviously we know the county's requirement to have a resolution from the city council before the county would take action, final action on including it in the docket or not. We knew what the county required in terms of these 8 items at the back. We also were aware that there had been some outside commentary directed towards the council that you should adopt something sooner rather than later. You've heard that from some members of the public. You've potentially heard that from some members of the county themselves. And so Dr. Merriman and I wanted to give you an opportunity to see what this would look like before you would be asked to potentially take action on it, so that you could review it, you could be thinking about it, and you could feel free to ask those questions of me today in this setting rather than in your formal meeting setting. So this was a primer, if you will, Mayor, to get you kind of ready for that. Not knowing for sure when the council may want to try to take action, but we know we had shared that schedule with you, and so we just wanted to get you ready for it. Those were the basic thoughts.
I guess this resolution was in our council packet, the last one.
I think you're, oh, sorry, Mayor. I
I'm
think-
talking, no, I'm talking about the one at the end now, the
Oh,
proposed new resolution.
No, sir, it
Okay,
wasn't,
okay.
it was not in there.
So this is the first time council has
It's the
seen
first time
this.
council has seen this. There is one that's in your materials, but that is the resolution that the council adopted in July when you approved the countywide planning policies and gave us the direction on the JPA. So that's been included in your packet both for today and last week.
And that, though, was delivered to the county.
Yes.
The one dated in July.
Yeah,
Okay.
oh, yes,
Yeah.
yes, because,
Well, that,
Yeah.
I'm sorry for the confusion.
No, that's
but I
okay.
mean, so it should be fairly clear that we want to change in the JPA or are asking for that. Should be fairly clear.
yes, via your resolution in July, you told the county that you were interested in seeing expanded to the south and/or the southwest. You also expressed your desire as a body to have those lands designated priority growth area, as is consistent with the countywide planning policies.
Okay,
So that policy direction was sent to the county in July.
yeah. Is there, let me see, one thing I would caution you on, Councilor Munns, you asked for the same list to be shown about projects in process right now, and that's a conversation that Mr. Powers and I had a few days ago. And thanks for generating that list. The thing I think that's important to remember is some of those are very preliminary still. Yeah, so especially the Gary Oaks at this point. I mean, we certainly are having conversation with them, but it's still pretty.
They're formally in the process, you know, but they're not yet to the point where they're ready for a public hearing.
Okay. So, any other council? Okay. Any other, I guess we're done then with today's, that's
So,
it?
I guess maybe what the staff might need a little more help on is for next Tuesday. I think, are we meaning you, in general agreement that you'd be interested in having both resolutions for Tuesday? Is that what staff is hearing? Without straw voting or any of that stuff that we can't do? Okay. So, I'm pretty sure putting the one that's obviously already in this packet, that would be very easy, I believe, for us to get into your packet. It may be more challenging for us to get the one on the JPA into your packet because that's tomorrow already. We will get them added to your agenda. We'll meet our legal requirement. It may be necessary for us to get you the one on the JPA separate from the packet. We'll do our best, but I see that as a kind of a hiccup for us production-wise.
Okay. You'll do your best.
Yep.
Okay. Any other council? Oh, Councilor
On this
Heisen?
subject or or on the council comments?
Anything,
Anything at all?
anything at all
So we wrapped up this subject? Is that,
for today?
okay. So, sorry, I have a little bee in my bonnet today, so I apologize. In terms of council comments, I just wanted to get some follow-up or an update. Doug's not here, so Nicole, I'm probably talking to you about some of the things that have been brought up before, but that I haven't gotten an update on, and that would include, a vaping, e-cig ordinance, security cameras, a calendar of events for city council, so we know what's going on, and as it pertains to workshops, regular department head updates. We used to get all department head updates depending on, the committee, and when the workshop started, we still got, and in order to be efficient, we would ask, like the police chief and the fire chief, just email us your run report so we have the numbers. It was not my understanding when we asked for that we would then stop hearing from the police chief or the fire chief, or, I don't, and I've expressed this before, but in our workshop format, especially if we have time, which we do, I don't just want to hear about the things that we're going to vote on in the next week or two. That's not, that's not the extent of the information I would want. And at our joint planning commission parks meeting, someone mentioned that the senior center was able to partner with the Christian school to get a pickleball thing going, and I didn't know that. That is so cool. Just little stuff like that, if we could hear what's going on in every department, I would appreciate just to get a handle on just kind of what's going on overall at the city and not just the things that we're going to be voting on. So that is the bee in my bonnet. I'll keep asking until I feel like I'm getting the information I want, but just wanted to reiterate those priorities of mine and see if we can get some acknowledgement, update, something.
So I heard 4 things: vaping ordinance, security cameras, city council event calendar, and department head updates.
Perfect.
Okay, great. Councilor Wassmer?
Do we have a date for our next council retreat? My email was a little bit offline for a few days, and it was right when some of those emails were flying. Nikki or Steve or anyone, do we know the date yet for our next retreat?
I'm not aware of it.
For sure date?
I think we have our general workshop date.
How about a
set.
retreat?
Oh,
Retreat.
oh,
I'm sorry, I meant
no.
retreat. Council retreat.
Yeah, I was answering the question that you were asking,
Oh,
not the
sorry.
one that you said.
Oh.
So yeah, I don't
Sorry.
know about a retreat date.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
okay.
But we can find out.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we've decided to wait until after the first of the year
Oh,
for our retreat.
We did have one scheduled for the 18th of November on a Saturday.
And I don't think we're gonna do that at this point.
Okay. I go along with Ms. Heisen. That'd be nice. We'd hear stuff like that.
So retreat will be setting that date before long. Resetting, I guess I should say.
I'm sorry, Mayor?
Resetting the date,
Yeah.
I should say.
I'll make sure that we get that message to Doug.
Thank you. Okay, any other input? Okay, thank you today. Always, thank you. We're adjourned.
Good meeting.